Hello, Caitriona.
How are
Thank you so
you?
much for, I'm very well. Thank you so much for joining us on your opening night of
Yeah.
Joyce's Women with Edna O'Brien. And I was just telling to her in the green room, I opened the New York Times and I go, I know somebody on this page. And there she was. Beautiful featured article on, did you commission this play for the Abbey?
No, my predecessor did that. In fact, I'm only in the job just over a year, and my predecessor Graham McLaughlin actually commissioned it. So it was one of those things you get in your inbox, you know, around last December it arrived, the first draft, and it was a quick turnaround. But we have Conal Morrison working as director on it, and he's done a great job.
Don't be surprised if I pop over because it just looks so great and I'm, major Joyce freak. So I'm just would love to see it. But I would love to talk about this summer that
Okay.
your choice to direct Brian Friel's translation and translations. And starting out in the Lyric Theatre in Belfast, you had a summer run, the Abbey, moved on to tour to Limerick and to Galway, and closed the show in Letterkenny, not very far from Brian Friel's mythical Ballybeg. Why did you decide to do translation now, this time, 100 years after partition, with Brexit, and with Ireland formulating its new status on the world stage? Tell us about the play and your choices to do it now.
Well, that's exactly why. I suppose the important part of running a national theatre is that you, I suppose, contribute to the national conversation. And I'm a big believer in the way to do that is kind of at a slant. It's not coming out and kind of being very dictatorial and telling people this is what you should be doing, this is what you should think. I don't think that works for most people. So I was thinking about how do I put my stamp on the work? And I suppose the starting place was, the quality of writing. And you can't, Brian Friel appeals to a huge majority of people. He has that amazing ability to tap into that part of humanity that is in all of us, no matter what our intellectual interests are, no matter what our background is. Brian Friel has the ability to make us laugh or cry or understand ourselves in a way that, few playwrights, but great playwrights do. So it was easy enough to think about, in terms of quality work, to have Brian Friel on the list. But I was really interested in exactly what you said, looking at, who are we now 100 years on from partition? What does that mean to us? Do we ever think about it? Do people in the rest of the island think about it in the way that, we grew up kind of conscious of it? And I suspect not. And I thought, there's a lot of anniversary celebrations around, the historical impact of these actions that happened 100 years ago, but people are living the consequences and of them very, very directly in Ulster. And I suppose translations felt like the perfect play to come at that in a slant, because primarily the play is about language and identity. And our language and identity is changing. I mean, there are more people who speak Polish in Ireland today as fluently than Irish, which is fantastic, kind of mad concept. And I find that kind of utterly fascinating. And I love how we're changing. And, I think it's really important for us as an island not to be afraid of change, but to be excited by it. And I personally am very excited by how people for the last 20 years have been interested in coming to Ireland and even making their way up to the show. When I was growing up, it was rare.
Is that where you're from, Inishowen?
Yeah,
Is that where you're from?
Carndonagh. I'm from Carndonagh.
I think I've been through it at the Fig with Mary, I think, but she has a great car. I want to go
Yeah.
to language, because I think language is we've heard it a couple of times, and especially starting with Moya, just her lovely reciting of the townlands, and obviously that's so critical a part of translations. I mean, you once said is that, as a nation, once more in a moment of change and possibility, a time when our language and how we communicate is central to us, who we are and what kind of society we're going to be. What is it in the Irishness and the Donegalness? I mean, you were I think your great grandfather was at the New School, and there was what we had talked about, in translations, that was the crux of the action. How was the multiple languages, and I think one quote in translation, she must decode us, I mean, talk about language and how central it is, the Gaeltacht, Irish as well as finding its place in a greater context in the world.
I suppose it's quite a difficult question to answer in many ways, but language for me, like our use of words specifically as individuals, the words that we choose, the phrases that identify us, is where I'm really interested in it, in terms of how it defines a character. And my grandfather used to quote Greek and Latin, and I found real strong connections with Hugh in translations, because that character of Hugh felt really familiar to me. And I was always fascinated by the fact my parents both learned Greek and Latin in school and would have odd phrases. And I was always fascinated, even though, well, both of them, I suppose, went to school in Letterkenny, but my father's from Inishowen and my mother's from Letterkenny. And my father went to St. Eunan's and my mum to the convent, to Loreto, and they both were educated as Gaelic, even though they weren't native speakers. So little phrases were always from different languages were always just part of everyday speech, particularly in my mother's parents' house, but in our house too, more Irish Englishisms. And I think that's common enough in Donegal. I think those kind of hybrid phrases and specific phrases that are drawn from both languages are a real Donegal thing, and gives us our own language, our own voice, our own identity in a way. And now I'm fascinated to see what happens if we start to bring, Polish into the little bits of French, or Polish into that, mix that we have, because language is always changing anyway. I mean, we know this, don't we? We know that words change meaning, and how we use them changes, and there are certain words we can no longer use, and certain words that have insinuations that are not quite accurate in the contemporary world. So I suppose I have no answer for you really, Mary.
I think what I've done is but I think you're hitting on something, and the ability, the cognitive structures to be able to absorb language of multiple forms as we're in this new world that we're in, that we have to think differently, and then with more inclusivity in solving problems, whether it's writing code. We can't have, the same old male, pale, and stale writing the code. No. We need more ingenuity. And that's one of the things that you said when you took on the artistic directorship of the Abbey. You're looking for new voices. You're looking for new influences coming in. And the ability to have that fusion actually is very modern, to be able. My grandmother used to speak in Irish to us, and I'd go into the schoolyard and call someone an Amadan, and they thought we were nuts, but that level, the richness of it can translate because your cognitive structures are opening. So I would love to talk specifically to you about what are the newness that you want to bring to the National Theatre, the new voices that you mentioned.
Well, we recently, I'll give you an example. It's always, isn't it, the easiest way to understand a person's thinking, but recently I put on an Octoroon, or programmed an Octoroon, which is a play written by an American, young male Black American writer, Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. And Brandon became obsessed with Dion Boucicault. Dion Boucicault was a writer, Victorian, I suppose, who was born just around the corner from the Abbey. And he wrote, his impulse when he was writing was to put Irish characters on the stage in a way that wasn't the buffoonish characters that had been presented in sort of a British theatre up to that point. You know, we were the drunken, kind of illiterate fool, really. And he kept us drunk, but he made us eloquent. But he wrote a whole series of wonderful plays that kind of reinvented the Irish man on stage. And he was very political, and he was really interested in the politics of the day. So he wrote this play, An Octoroon, about a person who had 1/8 Black, who was 1/8 Black and grew up on a plantation. And Brandon Jacobs Jenkins found this play, and it is, you know, to the contemporary ear, it's incredibly offensive. But the play's impulse was to draw attention to slavery and the abolition of slavery at the time. But what really excited me about Brandon's response in a culture and in a world where we have a cancel culture, we have very binary attitudes, everything's, you know, things are right or they're wrong, or they're black or they're white. Or he decided not to cancel or object to the impulse or the writer. He fell in love with the skill and the ability of Dion Boucicault, and he adapted the play to reframe it in a way that draws attention to why it's problematic today, and had success in America and the UK. But we had an incredible success with this play, which has its origins around the corner, travels to America, as Boucicault did himself, gets reframed, and comes back and teaches us a lesson about racism. That's the voice I'm interested in.